So as we get started tonight, this is our last session, and you'll be happy to know that we are working at the top of the triangle. So as you're logging in and getting started, I know I'm preaching to the choir. Many of you have been here multiple times, and some of you are brand new to this, which is also very exciting. And as you're looking at getting started, if you are in a system that has an integrated tiered system of support, this is a tier 3 intervention that we're talking about tonight. And if you're not yet in a system that is an integrated tiered system, you might consider exploring comprehensive integrated 3-tiered models of prevention. And we're actually running a 3-part training series this summer. It's all virtual. It is only $50 to attend. So if that's something that's interesting to you, please feel free to let us know. We'll give you that information for you to explore registration. But to set the stage, in the ideal circumstance, if you have the opportunity to be in a system that has clarities of tier 1, and it is a Ci3T system, it might look something like this. As part of that building process, people are not getting rid of what they're already doing. They're organizing the wonderful things that are happening in their school, and it's creating clarities at tier 1. What am I going to teach? How am I going to teach it? How am I going to bring in evidence-based practices? How am I going to use high leverage practices? How am I going to put that into my integrated system that allows me to have clarity on what I'm teaching, how I'm teaching, so that I can do those what seems like impossible tasks of keeping first grade kids engaged for 90 minutes of uninterrupted English and language arts. And if you're doing block scheduling at the high school level, how do you keep all those kids engaged in really meaningful ways? And those would be some clarities. Thank you very much. Love the hearts. Those would be some of the clarities that have been built into your plan. Also, this is based on more than 70 years of inquiry that involved applied behavior analysis. And we know that we are changing the experience for students by first changing the experience for the adults. So part of Ci3T systems is using the data that are available to figure out what adults think kids need to know to be successful. And we have a tool that you're welcome to use. It's called the School-Wide Expectation Survey for Specific Settings. Shout out to me for remembering what that is. And to David Royer and Katie Pelton for doing some great work on taking what information has been gleaned about how people use that survey to build these expectation matrices, so that, like, imagine in your school or in the schools in your district, if all those expectations were not built by just 5 well-intended people, and instead they were informed by what are the priorities from the bus drivers, the cafeteria workers, the counselors, the school psychologists, the custodians, as well as the general and special education community. That is your teaching tool. And also in a Ci3T system, there's a planned way for responding to challenging behaviors at tier 1 that begins by showing empathy, keeping instruction moving forward. And I know, like, Allison Bernard and Elise Saracen and Catherine Johnson and Amy Buffington and Stacey Williams have probably done those presentations about 100 times, most downloaded module that we have. But we need both sides of that. We need to teach expected behavior that's been defined, practiced, and acknowledged. And then we have to have a plan for responding when challenges do occur. We also, as part of our Ci3T systems, encourage you to identify and bring in a validated resource to skill build within your district, to have the opportunity to teach kids skills that they need to become self-aware, self-regulated citizens that have self-determined behaviors, that can resolve conflict and can get along with peers and adults. That becomes what we serve in a Ci3T system. And even with all that in place, and when it's implemented as planned, that is a challenging task. And the good news is there's a ton of resources available to you on our website and others that create clarities on how to go from those great ideas to putting them into place. And even with that all in place as designed with treatment integrity, you're still going to have kids that need additional supports. So, for example, when we were together the last time, if you were at the last Empower session, we looked at Recognize, Relax, Record. It's a tier 2 intervention that's all designed to teach kids what it feels like when their body's feeling anxious. They learn strategies about how to calm themselves to regulate those anxious feelings. And then they're taught how to use those new skills to support positive, productive engagement. And tonight, we're going to be right here. These are my favorite kids, the kids that need tier 3 supports for really challenging behaviors. And when we look at those types of interventions, we don't need a bunch of them. We need ones that are really well tested, like the one that we're going to show you tonight. But I do want to say, before you get into that priority of looking at tier 3, we really want to encourage everybody to know what is happening in your system at tier 1, because your tier 3 and your tier 2 interventions need to build on what's happening at tier 1. We don't want to confuse kids by bringing in different languages or building on things in a way that's not connecting back to tier 1, because otherwise those new skills will not generalize as well. So in a tier 1 system, that is why we are encouraging everybody, ideally in fall and spring, to measure treatment integrity, to find out like what parts are you teaching? How's the integration going? How are you using reinforcement? And tonight, when you hear from Elise and David and Wendy, you're going to listen for this theme of still using the universal reinforcer. When you're building any kind of additional intervention that builds on tier 1, do not bring in a new universal, don't bring something different than the universal reinforcer, because that's how we program for generalization, to make sure that kids are going to get additional reinforcement beyond the new lessons learned. And also within those tier 1 plans, we want to make sure that we have a voice for all the adults in the building, because we need to hear from the people that are implementing it so that they have information to share about how is this going? Am I on board with the goals and the procedures? And do I think this is working? So that I can then look at student level data to make decisions about who needs more than tier 1 has to offer when I am sure that tier 1 is in place. So bringing you back to the front, if you are brand new to this website, sign up when you get a chance. And I want to let you know this will have a completely different look and feel when you come back next fall. We will be migrating our website. We have hired a company. We're so excited about those options that they're bringing. It will be ADA compliant, and it will have a rich array of a new learning management system, which we'll tell you more about if you're interested in learning more. But nonetheless, what we're doing for today is we are closing out this academic year with you, and we applaud you for being here towards the end of April to learn a little bit more about how to support kids with the most intensive intervention needs, kids that have challenging behaviors that not only impact their learning, but the learning of others. So today we're going to do a couple of things. We are going to explain just briefly how this is situated at the top of the triangle at tier 3, and we're going to get rid of some myths, and then we're going to walk through a step-by-step approach. And I want you to know, you're going to hear this and you're going to think, oh my gosh, can this be done? Preach. This 100% can be done. There's been multiple studies. Elise Saracen and other members of our team are actually concluding a giant systematic review of the literature that shows exactly how well this has been done for many, many years. And we're also going to hear those things about why it is important to measure implementation. Why is it important to have student voice and family voice and teacher voice? Because it's not enough to know if it's working for a kid. We need to make sure it is in place as planned. And then give me a thumbs up in the chat, or give a hand raise. Are any of you using the tiered fidelity inventory in your schools to monitor implementation of the tiered system that you're in? And if not, no sweat. But if you are, we want to help you to make really explicit connections to that tool. So today, what we're doing as far as individualized support plans, this is item 3.5 in the new tiered fidelity 3.0 version. So we want to help to make those connections if you're using it. Some people are saying, I'm not really sure if we do that. You do that if you're doing these types of things. So as we're getting started, I hope you feel welcomed. We're going to talk a little bit more about where this is situated within a tiered system. And then we're going to get started on breaking down those steps. So the first thing we want to do is help you to find the resources that we're looking at tonight. So if you would, and thanks to Wendy Oakes for putting in the website where you can find the modules. In addition, we're going to look right now on the tab that says professional learning tab. And if you open up that blue accordion, you're going to have the resources that you could enjoy as you're working through today's session. And what we are sharing to you today is also available in a series of modules. There are special issues that are online that are available if you have access to university libraries, and there are books. And all these steps, no matter if you download it from our website, go to a module, jump in a book, they will all be exactly the same. So take comfort in knowing that you have multiple points of access for how you can gather this information. All right, as soon as you have found that website of ci3t.org/pl, go ahead and put in the chat, found it, got it. If you can't find it, just scream man down. Somebody will help you to get it. We want to make sure you've got what you need. So when we think about where to do this, and remember, this is for kids that have intensive intervention needs. And as we think about supporting all learners in a Ci3T system, I want you to remember kids that are receiving special education services, as well as typically developing kids that are just in the general education system, as well as kids that are at heightened risk for both major challenges of childhood, they all can receive supports throughout this system. So we want to do a little bit of clarification first to make sure that we're clear on who we're talking about that might benefit from Tier 3. First point being is language. So we're going to invite you tonight, and hopefully moving forward, not to refer to these kids as red zone kids or Tier 3 kids. These are kids that have Tier 3 supports, and it fluctuates. So they might have Tier 3 needs for reading, or they might have Tier 1 needs for math. They might have Tier 3 needs for removing like fear of social interactions. So remember that the person comes before the challenge. The other thing we want to make sure that people are clear on is that in the olden days, it used to be Tier 2 was small group and Tier 3 was individual supports. And instead, it is more about a shift in intensity. So ideally, Tier 2 and Tier 3 are building on what's happening at Tier 1. So it's an intensification and it's adding on support. So we're not removing kids from accessing Tier 1. So within a Tier 3 intervention, it's no longer like a one-to-one, leave the classroom, come back, learn something, and then fix yourself. Oftentimes, and preferably, these are taking place within the day-to-day context for kids. They're not always one-to-one. And when you look at what we're going to talk about today, it is a 5-step process that's been fully manualized, and it's all designed to figure out what is the behavior that if we can change that one keystone behavior, it will create other paths forward for a student. So in other words, if I can intervene early enough in the acting out cycle, I can prevent kids from having more significant challenges, and I can unlock other learning. So tonight, you're going to hear people talk about if aggression is your main concern, that's not where we want to start collecting baseline data. We want to get in front of it to figure out what is a precursor behavior earlier in that chain. And another thing we want to make sure that we're clear on, Tier 3 is not special education in this model. There may be some kids that are receiving special education that are also going to screen in as potentially benefiting from a functional assessment-based intervention, but it can be anybody. It can be anybody that has intensive intervention needs. And who the persons are that provide the strategies, the practices, and the supports, it's going to depend a lot of the context. So as you're thinking about this, if you are lucky enough to get to work in a school system that has an integrated tiered system, you might have intervention grids that makes it really transparent, which is important for communicating with families and others, because we want to make sure that people know what is ideally happening at Tier 1. And we want to make sure that it is transparent, that there's a gift to families that says, here's all the things that we're prepared to do if your child needs more than Tier 1, even when Tier 1 is in place well. So as we're looking at this, you're going to see these intervention grids. And there can be, these intervention grids are not just about behavior, it's about any intensive intervention need. Like Read 180 by Tud Hasselbring, great intervention. It's used for secondary age kids that really have intensive intervention needs. That is a Tier 3 intervention. And there's clarities in these grids describing what are we talking about by that intervention, who is doing what to whom and under what condition. And then there's a plan about figuring out what data are you going to look at that is collected by everybody, like on every kid in the school, to figure out who might benefit from this support. And anytime we're going to do a more intensive intervention, there's 3 things you're going to keep track of. Before you get started, look at social validity. Ask the people involved, are you comfortable with this goal, these procedures? Do you think this is going to work? And when you start an intervention, we need to measure whether or not it's happening. It's not enough to join a CrossFit gym. It is not enough to join a nutrition program. You actually have to implement it as planned to get that desired change you're looking for, which is a third part. We've got to accurately measure the thing that you're trying to move. So whether it's a reading intervention, you want to name the intervention, describe it. We want to have the systematic approach to make sure nobody gets overlooked. That is important. We want to look at the school-wide data to see who might benefit from this extra support. And then, as I mentioned, we want to look at those 3 things. student performance, implementation, social validity. And we're not going to just let kids grow old in these interventions. We're going to look to see, are we getting the desired change? Is it stable? Can I fade it? Or is it time to intensify it? Or is it time to fade it, etc.? So when you're thinking about social validity, there's lots of ways to measure it. Sometimes it's done with validated tools. Sometimes it's done with semi-structured interviews. It can be very informal. You just want something that's accurate to make sure that you're gathering that information. Similarly, like if you're building a de-escalation plan, another great approach for managing tier 3 needs. So that is a great thing that a lot of schools really enjoy doing. And the nice part about that, it's empowering educators to know how to intervene, not only to recognize what each stage looks like, but how to intervene at each stage. And just remember, when we're doing things like counselor-led lessons for tier 2, we can intensify those with the addition of like another check-in with an adult, or maybe some one-to-one component where we're prompting kids on the use of those. But the idea would be we want to bring in things to our system at tier 1, at tier 2, at tier 3 that have enough evidence behind them to suggest if you do this as planned with treatment integrity, you're likely to get what you're looking for in terms of the changes for students. It's not a series of isolated interventions. Like, it would not be helpful for a student to spend all their time at tier 3 learning things that are not connecting back at tier 1, because then those behaviors are likely to not maintain and over time and generalize to new learning environments. So as you're thinking about all the different supports, whether it's wraparound supports, whether it's community partnerships, those would also be listed as tier 3. Just keep in mind, whatever you're doing at tier 3, I want you to ask yourself the question, do you think people in your community know what you do at tier 3? Do you think they know how to figure out whether or not they can gain access to it and how? And are those interventions guided by data? And when we say data, and these are fictitious kids' needs, what we're meaning by that is we want to make sure that we ensure every person has an equal opportunity to be considered. So if the intervention requires regular attendance, or if it's designed like for somebody that has poor attendance, we want to make sure that every kid's attendance data are looked at. We want to look at the results of your behavior screening, your academic screening. And when we say looking at multiple sources of data, we're not saying you need multiple behavior screenings. We're saying look at different sources of information to look to see which kids might benefit from that using that entry criteria that we just talked about. So in the perfect world, you have a manual. Inside the manual, it has the list of all the offerings that you have in place. You would review your data and you'd make decisions in partnerships with families. It is not done to a family or to a child. It's done in partnership with them. Together, you would make decisions about how to intervene. So right now, if you would, pop in the chat, please. What interventions do you currently offer that you believe are tier 3 interventions in your school or in your district? Yep, you can do counseling interventions as a tier 3 support. Behavior support plans, wonderful. And we're going to talk today about functional assessment-based interventions, which is one approach for getting there. And it might be like check-in, check out is a really solid tier 2 interventions. And even that can be intensified to become a tier 3 intervention. Great. And intensive, yes, this is wonderful. So thank you so much for all being here and willing to learn more, explore what you have, and keep the idea in mind, please, that wouldn't it be great if we could create transparencies so that every single person that is employed in your building and every family who has the gift of getting their children to attend their stuff, then make sure that they know what the supports are that are available. And right now, we're going to talk about one tonight, functional assessment-based intervention, effective one. And we're going to start by hearing first from Elise. She's going to give you an overview.
All right, so we're going to start in this next section with just a really high-level overview of what is functional assessment-based intervention, and then we'll go step by step through the process with lots of opportunities to practice and connect with other folks here on the call. So first up, what is functional assessment-based intervention? You might hear us say FABI for short, the acronym. And this is that tier 3 grid that Kathleen just talked us to. So when we think about FABI, like who is it for? It is an intensive intervention. It's at tier 3. So we're not doing this for lots of kids. We're doing this for just a few students who have some really intensive needs. So these are students who might be screening in at high risk on your behavior screener. They might have a lot of office discipline referrals. They're students who are having a really challenging time at school. They're engaging in behaviors that are not leading them to be successful at school. And then we'll talk more extensively about what type of data we might want to look at to see if our FABI is working, and then how will we know when it's time to fade that intervention. So when we think about, okay, what is FABI? Big picture, it's a customized intervention. So it's individualized and it's based on why a behavior occurs. So it's helping us figure out here's this behavior, this challenging behavior that's having a really negative impact on the student's day to day school experience. Why is that happening? And how can we teach them a different way to get that need met? How can we put a plan in place that's going to address why this is happening and help them engage in different behaviors to still get their needs met, but be a little bit more successful in our school environments? It's a 5-step process and it's team based, and we'll talk about who's on that team in a moment. And it's grounded in applied behavior analytic principles. So you'll hear us use a lot of terms that will pause and define and kind of point you to some resources, but this is grounded in a very large research base that's showing us how do we do this in our PK through 12 school settings to support students who are having those challenging behaviors. So if we zoom in here on this infographic, and if you're like, ooh, this is pretty, I would like that infographic, you can find it in this module here, the functional assessment-based intervention. Anytime we feature something from a module, you'll see that card in the upper right corner, and that's just to help you know where you can look to find it if you wanted to download a copy. But really high level, this is a 5-step intervention. The first part is about identifying which students might benefit from this intervention. So we're going to use different sources of data, and we're going to figure out who's having a hard time and who might this be a good fit for. And then we're going to do step 2, which I might be a little biased, but I think it's my favorite step. It's very fun. It's like all the collection, all the evidence collection. You're getting all these different pieces of information about the student and their experience historically at school and their experience in school right now. We're getting lots of evidence to help us figure out why might this be happening. And then we're going to use that information. First, we're going to get some baseline data. We're going to figure out what's that behavior we really want to focus on. Maybe it's off task. Maybe it's about interacting with peers or adults. Maybe it's about work completion and turning work in. Whatever that behavior we want to focus on, that target behavior we want to go down. We're going to also think about what's the behavior we want to see increase, and we're going to measure that. And we're going to say, how is the student doing right now without any of the supports in place? And that way, when we do put our intervention in place, we're able to see, is it working? Is it changing the student's behavior in the way we hope to see? Step 4 is also a very fun one, probably second favorite. This is where you're building out that intervention. This is when you're saying, okay, here's what we know about the student. Here's our hypothesis, why we think this behavior is happening, and how can we put together an intervention that has antecedent adjustments, reinforcement shifts, and extinction components to help the student be more successful. So you get to design your plan there and roll it out to the teacher and the student. And then finally, in step 5, we test the intervention. We see, is this working? Are we seeing the change in student behavior that we want to see? We look at social validity. How does this land? Does the student find this acceptable? What does the teacher think about this intervention? Is it feasible? Can they do it? Is the growth the student making, is that like socially significant? Did we go from being on task 20% of the time to 70% of the time, which you might see 70% and be like, oh, I don't know, is that good? But to go from 20 to 70, yeah, that's great. That is a significant gain that we can celebrate and still maybe continue to push for. But it's really helping us understand, is this intervention meeting your needs? And we want to know that from the educator, from the student, and from the family. And then, as Kathleen mentioned, we're going to also look at treatment integrity. Is the intervention in place as designed? Because before we can kind of make a conclusion about, did this work, we want to know, was it put in place as we intended? Because if we maybe weren't doing all of the pieces all of the time, we don't want to say the intervention didn't work because maybe we weren't able to do it consistently. So we'd use that data to say, what could we change so that we're able to do this more successfully and more consistently to see those outcomes that we're really hoping for. So why is FABI effective? Why this model? There are a lot of different approaches to functional behavior assessments, FBAs, and behavior intervention plans, BIPs. Those might be terms you've heard before. They do happen in the special education world. There's certain circumstances where a student might have it as part of their IEP. And what we're talking about today is FABI as a Tier 3 intervention. You certainly could use it for students who have IEPs. You'd want to make sure you're looking at your state and federal guidance there, but we're looking at it today as a Tier 3 intervention. So why this approach? Why is this helpful? Well, first, it's individualized. It's based on this specific student and their specific needs and the specific environment. So usually the classroom, what's happening in this exact instance and what are the things that we can tweak a little bit that's going to make a better environment for everybody. And 2, it focuses on skill building. This is about saying this behavior serves a purpose. This behavior is working for this student. It is helping them get their needs met. So instead, we're going to teach them a new, better, more contextually appropriate, efficient way to get their needs met. Because what they're doing right now is working, and we want to help them learn a new way to get that need met that's going to work better in school for them so that they can be more successful and have better, positive social interactions with their peers and their teachers. So we're going to build some skills to do that. Next, it's step by step. There's a lot of pieces that can go into this. Like we will kind of walk through those 5 steps and it's like, oh, that could be a lot to remember. But this walks you through everything you need is there. Every form, every step, all in these checklists that can help you make sure that we're going through really strategically and really consistently so we're able to get this into place. And then finally, it's team-based. So it focuses on collaboration between the teachers and the school-based team, the family, and the student themselves. And that's what makes this, I think, really powerful, is it's a whole group of people working together who care a lot about this student, who want this student to be successful, and are working together to make that happen. So who's on your team? When you think about FABI, usually there's 2 people who are kind of like standing team members, meaning they're always on the team. So this might be someone from your leadership team, maybe a principal or a teacher who serves on a leadership team, and then staff who have some behavioral expertise. So maybe you have a social worker or a counselor or a behavior specialist, but someone who has a lot of knowledge in the area of behavior. And then we'll have at least one of the classroom teachers for the student. So if they're in middle or high school and have multiple teachers, you could have multiple teachers on there, but for sure one classroom teacher and at least one member of the student's family and the student themselves. So this makes sure that our team has a variety of perspectives on the student and their experience at school and at home so that we can work together to get a plan in place. What are some of the benefits and challenges when you're thinking, oh, well, we already have a system in place, or we already do something kind of like that? Fantastic. What are some of the things that are really unique about this model that maybe can kind of inform some of the work you're doing? Or if you're ever in a place where you wanted to shift your approach, why might you choose FABI? So one of the big benefits, it's collaborative, it's team-based. I probably sound like a broken record, but I remember when I was a classroom teacher and I would have loved a seat at the table. I would have loved a seat at the table to help build the intervention, to help share my perspective and say, man, that sounds really great, but like, I think I'm going to have a hard time managing that. I have 27 other kids. How could I do that? And to have someone help problem solve with me and to be able to share my perspective on where the kid is really successful and what's tricky and how we can make a plan that's more likely to work in my setting, in my environment, in my classroom. 2, there's a really strong evidence base. So this has been studied for over 20 years. That first empirical study came out in 2004. It has been studied pre-K through 12 for a variety of behavior for students with disabilities, without disabilities, in the US, outside the US, across the US. It has been studied and it works. Really consistently, we see like large magnitude effects, meaning like really big changes in student behavior. So this is exciting and it's something that when it's tried and it's tested, we do see that it's working. And then it's fully manualized. So it's something that's there, you can work through, and it helps kind of keep us going all in the same direction, kind of avoids any like drift. It's all manualized, it's all there for you. What's tricky about FABI? I would say this is true for any like FBA bit process. It is time and resource intensive, certainly. It does take time to do. It takes a little bit of time to learn. Sometimes there's some additional training you want to do about measurement or collecting data. And we would also think about like you are already spending this time on the student, probably just reactively, right? These are the students with the most intensive needs. They are already taking a lot of time and resources. This is about us saying like, let's push pause and let's use these time and resources to work together really cohesively to get a plan in place to support this student. And then lastly, this is kind of an adjustment from that like traditional FBA or BIP in some systems, like somebody comes in, they observe, they write a plan, they give it to you, and they say, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Have a good day. And that is not what this is. This is a group of people working together to build the plan, test the plan, revise the plan. So it is just like different than people might be used to, and there can be some growing pains there. So with that, we'll pause for just a moment. I'm going to invite you to open up your chat and go ahead and put in there either what's feeling really feasible. What about this feels exciting or interesting, or maybe is really similar to something you already do? What's feeling really feasible? Or maybe what's challenging, or what's like a question you have about like, hi, I wonder what that looks like. So I'll pause talking, give you some time to pop in the chat what feels feasible, what feels maybe a little challenging. Yeah, definitely. Being able to adapt, it's a little bit more flexible. A shift away, especially if you have a process that's been in place for a while. Anytime doing something new can be challenging. Absolutely. Nice. Already a really great plan in place. Lots of those pieces. Yep. Time commitment. Absolutely. Sure, yeah, there can absolutely be some resistance. And hopefully, one of the things often we see is when the classroom teacher gets to be part of building the plan, there tends to be a little bit less resistance because they've got that seat at the table and they're able to kind of share early on, like, oh, this is feeling a little hard. I'm not sure I can do that. Yep. So maybe if your triangle's feeling a little flipped, if you're sitting there going, man, I feel like we have a lot more than 5% who would be at that tier 3 need, you might want to pause and say, actually, let's focus on tier 1. Let's really go back to what are some universal supports. Maybe we can ramp up use of like low intensity strategies, and what can we do at tier 1 to support more students so that when we are doing FABI, it really is for that smaller percentage. Data collection. Yeah, what do you do when you have multiple students who need this? Good question. Awesome. All right. I will try to keep scrolling. These are fantastic. All right. So now let's start just super high level. I'm going to give you a preview of what's coming next. We're going to talk through each step one at a time. And then there'll be opportunities to either be chat active or we have some breakout rooms planned. So the goal is that you're able to kind of get a little flavor, a little taste of what is FABI, what are the pieces, kind of pique your interest, and then point you to resources where you can continue to learn more. So if you leave here today and you're like, you know what, I really think this is something I want to dig into, or I think my school could really benefit from this, there's a couple different places where you can kind of continue to build that knowledge. We do have a tab on our website. We also have this series of modules which walks through, there's actually 6. There's that intro one, which just gives you kind of high level, what is FABI, and then there's one for every single step. And in those modules is every single thing you would need to do to implement this. Every form, everything is there. You can download it. It walks you through in detail kind of what we're talking about today. So it is designed to be there for you to use for yourself. If you wanted to do kind of like book club style, you could do that with a team of folks. So that is there to kind of continue to guide your learning. It's 100% free on our website, self-paced. That could be a great thing to do. And if you're like, I want to do a book study with a real book, there's this fantastic book, the only book I saved from my grad school. It's really good. It is written for practitioners. So it is very, very user-friendly. It is like, here's the step, here's how you do it, here's an example. So if you wanted to do like an actual book study or kind of look and see some more examples, we would love to point you to that resource as well. So with that, let's talk about step 1. Step 1, we are identifying who might need a FABI, who might benefit from a FABI. And we're going to do that by looking at multiple sources of data and then connecting with families and connecting with students. So first step, we want to look at our tier 3. If you're at a school implementing Ci3T, you have your tier 3 intervention grid. So you'll want to look at that and think about what are the entry criteria? What is the data I'm going to use to decide who might benefit from this intervention? It doesn't mean if they meet the criteria, they automatically get it. It just means like, who are the students we might want to consider if this is a good fit? You're probably going to look at things like academic screening data because you know that behavior and academics are kind of like chicken and the egg. They often co-occur. They often happen together. So you'll likely want to take a look at that. Probably some behavior screening. So if you use the SRSSIE, you're probably looking at students who are at some high risk for externalizing or maybe internalizing behavior, can often have both. Probably looking at like office discipline referrals or in-school suspension, any type of like exclusionary discipline. And then attendance records. We want to know, is the student a regular attender? Because if they're not a regular attender, we probably want to intervene there first before we put this like really intensive intervention in place if they're not at school every day to get to benefit from that intervention. Then we want to follow your district procedures. You're going to connect with the family and the student. So when you connect with the family, you're going to talk them through like high level, what is FABI, kind of what's your role as a family, how are you part of this team? And then you might also use this to kind of present other tier 3 options. You might say, hey, we're really interested in exploring this. Here's what this would look like. I also want you to know that we could do this individualized de-escalation plan instead. That's another great intervention that we have at our disposal. Like which one of these feels like a better fit for you? And then you'll follow your district procedures to get that parent permission, just like you would for any tier 3 intervention. You want to make sure parents know that this is happening and that this is something that they've consented to. And then for the student, you'll meet with them and you're going to explain the goals. This isn't like a secret. They're part of the team. They're going to notice people are there. They're observing them. They're going to be part of conversations. They're getting interviewed. So it's about taking that time up front to explain to them, hey, here's what we're noticing. I want to help you be more successful at school. It's really important to me that you have a great school experience. So here's what we're going to do. And I'm really excited that we get to figure this out together. And then giving them time to kind of ask questions and provide that assent to participate. Step 2, this is when we do the functional assessment. And as you can see here, there's quite a bit of pieces that fall into this step. And today we're just going to focus on these 3. But I did want to put this here just so you could kind of see it and understand that there's a lot happening in this step because this is where we gather all of the information. This is when we're getting as much evidence as we can just to help us understand who is their student, what is their experience like at school, like when does this behavior happen, what does it look like? It's getting lots and lots of information. One of the most important things that happens during this step is defining the target behavior. So the target behavior is that challenging behavior that we want to decrease, that we are hoping will go away, or will happen less frequently. And we're going to define that during the teacher interview. So as part of this step, you're going to interview the teacher. You're going to work with them to kind of make a list of like, these are the behaviors that are happening that are really challenging, that are really having an impact on the student's experience. And then they're going to rank them, and they're going to say like, this is the one behavior. I think if we could change this behavior, it would really impact them. That's that social validity piece. That's the teacher telling you, like, this is the socially significant behavior. Like, this is the one. If we did this, the student would be more successful at school. You're going to take that behavior and operationally define it. And what that means is we're going to give it a label. We're going to give a really clear definition, and then we're going to do examples and non-examples that are tailored to that student. So we're getting really specific about what does this behavior look like for this student. And that's going to help us build an intervention that's really tailored, and it's going to help us make sure we're measuring it really accurately. So when we make that definition, we want to make sure it's objective, it's observable, it's things that I can see and hear. I want to make sure it's really clear. Anyone should be able to pick up this definition, walk into a room, and observe. Is this happening? Yes or no? Like, that's how clear and granular that we want to get it to be. Really clear on what it is and what it isn't. Not a lot of room for subjective. So things like loud or disrespectful, like that's subjective. Like, what does that mean? What I think is loud may not be loud to you. So how do we get really clear on what that means? And then we want to make sure it has an action. Sometimes they call this like the dead person's test. So like not shouting out is not a behavior, because a dead person can do that. They also don't shout out. The behavior is about raising your hand. The behavior is about using your cups to indicate you need help or requesting assistance. Those are behaviors. A dead person cannot do that. So as an example, one for off task. If we're trying to decrease off task, we might have this target behavior. We're saying off task is when they attend activities other than the assignment. And for this kid, this is what it looks like. And this is why those examples and non-examples are important, because me being off task might look really different than Kathleen or Allison. So we want to make sure we know, okay, well, when Elise is off task, she's playing with her materials. She's talking to peers. She's drawing. These are things I'm doing that show you I'm off task. And the non-examples is when I'm doing the assignment. I'm doing that, or I'm using my materials for the assignment, maybe like math manipulatives, using them as intended. Another example here, verbal aggression. This is kind of a good example of like, how do we make something a little subjective more concrete? So that's any vocalization directed towards a peer or an adult at a volume above the expected level. So if your school has that like level 0, level 1, level 2, you can use that to kind of help calibrate on this definition, help get all on the same page about like, what does that mean? Because what I think is loud might not be what you think is loud. So saying like, I hate you at a voice level 3, that's really concrete. I can walk into a room and say, is this happening? Yes or no. Name calling, profanity, those are all kind of examples. And then here, the non-examples are important. Being at a level 3 at recess, that's fine. That is contextually appropriate. It is not contextually appropriate to be at level 3 in a classroom. Like shouting out the answer during choral response, that's right. That's expected. This one's kind of a good one of like why we do examples and non-examples, like going, ugh. I don't consider that verbal aggression personally. So I would put that in the non-example. But for some folks, they might hear a student do that or some like negative self-talk of like, oh, I'm so stupid. This is too hard. And they might be like, oh, that was verbal aggression. So this is why we want to make sure we're all on the same page about like what counts and what doesn't. Once you have that definition, you've done some more interviews, you talked with the student, you've talked with their family. Now we want to see, what does this look like in the classroom? So we're going to say, all right, we're going to do some direct observation. We're going to see what's happening antecedent, right before the behavior happens, behavior, and consequence, after. We're going to do that doing some ABC data collection. So you're going to find out the time of day that the behavior happens the most, or where it's most problematic. That's the part you want to observe. You're going to make sure to observe at least 3 times, definitely can do more, but you just want to make sure you're kind of getting to see a good pattern, a good trend. One data collection day wouldn't really give you that enough breadth. You want to see like, does this happen consistently over time? You hope that it's a behavior you'll see like 8 to 10 times across those 3 hours. So we're looking at behaviors that happen relatively frequently. So if you think about a behavior like tantruming, maybe a student really only tantrums like twice a week. You might want to pick a precursor behavior, something that happens a little earlier, or like desk flipping. Hopefully that's not happening multiple times a week or multiple times a day. What happens before that? Does the student start shouting? Do they engage in that verbal aggression? Is it about being off task? Like what's happening before? And that's the behavior we'd want to focus on instead of that more explosive one that happens less frequently. Because if we can interrupt it earlier, we won't see that big explosive behavior. Then we're only going to look at instances of the target behavior, which is why those examples and non-examples are so important. If I am observing for verbal aggression, I'm not writing down every time that I take the scenic route from my table to the pencil sharpener. That might be annoying. That's not like a super helpful behavior to like go meander around the room, but that's not the behavior we're talking about. We're just looking at verbal aggression. So you're just really, really dialed in, just that behavior. And then everyone goes on its own row because we're going to take those and we're going to put them on our function matrix. So the form zoomed in kind of looks like this. Each row is every instance of the behavior. So if it happened 10 times in the observation, you'd fill out 10 rows. You're going to write down just like high level what was going on. Was it whole group, small group, partner work, just what was going on? So reading instruction. Antecedent, what happened right before the pencil broke. The behavior, the student threw the pencil. And then what happened after is a consequence. The teacher looked at the student. So it's not consequence like good, bad, punishment. It's consequence of just what happened right after the behavior. In this case, the teacher looked at the student. And then we fill out that function column after. The function column gets filled out here. We fill it out and then we pop it onto our function matrix. This was like the innovation in 2004. Like John Umbright and colleagues developed this model. This was like the piece, along with another tool that David will show us later, to help people organize all this information, because John worked in the ABA world and then was like trying to support teams and like doing FBAs and BIPs in schools. And people were like, it is really hard to manage all this data. Like, I don't know what to do with it. It's hard to sift through it and figure out what's going on. And this tool helps people take their pieces of evidence and literally put it in the box or boxes that it matches. And it helps us zoom out and see where's like that preponderance of data, what might be going on here. So there's two columns. This first one is for positive reinforcement. That's about accessing something like positive, meaning like that you want it. It's desirable. It's going to increase the likelihood you engage in that behavior. You're going to get something. And then the other column is negative reinforcement. Not negative like bad, negative meaning avoid, escape. And you're escaping something, you're avoiding something, and that's reinforcing, meaning you're going to keep doing it. So accessing something could be like peer attention. Maybe kids laugh. It could be accessing teacher attention. Like maybe when I shout out, the teacher comes over and helps me. Or maybe they tell me, I'll be right there. That's still teacher attention. Negative reinforcement, that's escaping the attention. Getting to work alone or getting ignored by peers, that's examples of negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement for tangibles or activities is getting access to like something preferred, like a tablet, computer time, stickers, activities, things the student likes to do. That's like really reinforcing. They're going to keep engaging the behavior because they really want to keep doing that activity. Negative reinforcement is that avoid or escape. So like not having to do your work. So that could be like a homework pass or the skip the lunch line, or if when I go to the buddy room, I don't have to take my worksheet with me and I never have to do my math worksheet, I am getting to escape this non-preferred activity. And then sensory can be things like accessing fidgets or like noise canceling headphones to help kind of tamper down some sensory input. So when all your data is on there, it might look something like this. So you would have like quotes from the interviews. You would have your ABC data on there. That first number, the 1, means like the first observation. So the first time observed, then there's like a dot, a period. And then next to it, it means the like row, the second time this occurred, the third time this occurred. And what we're going to do is we're going to be able to zoom out and see what's our data showing us, which boxes are the most full. And the reason why this is helpful is because sometimes there are two functions. And if there are two things happening, we want to make sure our plan addresses both, because if we only address one, it is unlikely to be successful. So let's practice. So get your chats open. I'm going to read across the line. I know it might be a little small on your screen. And then I'm going to invite you to say, what's the function? So in the chat, you'll tell us what's the function is about. Positive reinforcement, accessing attention. Is it negative reinforcement, avoiding attention? Access tangibles, avoid tangibles, access sensory, avoid sensory. So this first one, it's the do now. The teacher is instructing the class to do their do now. So it's a journal writing activity. The kid is doodling in their notebook. And the consequence is they stop doodling and they look up when the teacher calls on a peer. What do we think might be happening there? What's the function? So one thing this could be is likely an escape of an activity. If the student is doodling, they're probably avoiding the writing. Potentially, there's something about that writing that they're not really wanting to engage in, so they're escaping. There definitely could be an attention component, right? If they're like, oh, my teacher might call on me, I want to do that. There definitely could be that piece there. Maybe they're doodling to avoid attention if the teacher's praising everyone who is writing and they're getting to avoid that teacher attention. So there's definitely context there. But for sure, they're escaping that activity. All right, still the do now. So now the teacher's reviewing, they're going over the answers. A peer is sharing their response. The student's on their phone. They keep playing on their phone until they're called on to answer. Oh, I hit the button twice. Spoiler alert. That one could be access activity or escape activity. Those are sometimes people call them like two sides of the same coin, right? Like it could be like I'm trying to get this preferred activity, which is like playing on my phone. It could be I'm trying to escape an activity if the doing the journal activity or participating in this whole group instructions. You could think of it as like two sides of the same coin. So that could work there. I will not hit the button this time. All right, the teacher is discussing the do now responses. The student is like physically turned in their seat. They're facing a wall. They're looking away from the board. And then they orient their body towards the board after 40 seconds. So they were kind of just like looking around. What could be going on there? Could be access attention, especially if peers are like, ooh, what are you doing? What's going on? Avoiding the activity. Yep, definitely not engaging in the activity if you're turned around in your chair. Yeah. Yeah. So I had escape activity, but there definitely could be an attention component. If their peers are like looking at them or it's getting that for sure. Okay. We are going to do more practice on this. So I'm going to show you the last two, but I promise you, you will have time to practice in your breakout room. So this next one, the teacher's going over more content. The student has their computer open. They're playing a game and they keep playing that game until they're given their assignment. That is escaping an activity. It's escaping doing that like whole group instruction. They're also accessing something preferred. And last one, it's independent work. They're doing questions from the textbook. They're turning to their peers. They're talking about orchestra rehearsal. Their peers are engaging. Their peers are talking back. That would be a good example of a dual function. They are accessing peer attention and they're also escaping an activity. So once you have all of that, you've got all that information in your grid, you're going to look at kind of like which squares have the most stuff in them. What seems to be going on the most? And then we use that to make our hypothesis. So that would sound like during the context. So during independent reading, the student, Frank, what does he do? He engages in non-compliant behavior. And he does that to escape too difficult tasks and to access peer and teacher attention. So for this student, Frank, there are two maintaining functions there. So at this point, we're going to shift to doing some more practice with the function matrix and trying to figure out function there, kind of be our little function detectives. So I'm going to invite you to go to ci3t.org/PL. That's the professional learning tab. And then you're going to scroll until you get to those blue accordions. And it's the very last one. And if you click on that, it has the handouts for today. And one of those handouts is the function matrix, which is what we're about to do in our breakout rooms. In your breakout room, we're going to spend the next 10-ish minutes, maybe a few less, just kind of going through and practicing, looking at some information, some evidence that was collected, and where we would put that on the function matrix.
Okay, so in the previous steps, you were collecting data to make a hypothesis about why the behavior was occurring, and now we're going to move into measuring that behavior. So let's move on to step 3. All right, so accurate data collection procedures are essential for making decisions, as you all know, and about making any decisions about changes in the behavior. So we want to make sure that we're measuring the behavior before we intervene. So that's called baseline, before we do any intervention or changes. And this allows us to know if the intervention is going to be effective once it is put into place. We know teachers don't often love this part because they want to intervene right away when they have this challenging behavior, but 3 to 5 observations will give us a good idea about where the behavior is before we do anything so we can make decisions after we put the intervention in place. Let me see if that works. Oh, so fancy. Okay, so we are going to focus on these first 2 steps of the components of step 3. All right, so the first thing we want to look at is determining the dimensions of the behavior of concern. So this infographic gives us guidance for determining the dimension of the behavior of interest, and that we will be measuring. So these are some things to think about in terms of selecting measurement systems. So the first one is frequency, which is the number of times the behavior occurs, and this is just a simple counting. We can also look at rate, which is the number of times the behavior occurs per unit of time. So we might say per second, per minute, a little less likely per hour. But this one allows us to account for uneven observations. So we know in natural school environments, you might intend to observe for a specific period of time, and then there's a fire alarm or something happens and your time is cut short, and you want to be able to use that observation. So this allows for us to equate over time. And we also know that frequency alone can sometimes be misleading, right? Because if we say, when we're varying the time, because we might say the behavior occurs 5 times, and it might be 5 times in 1 minute, or it might be 5 times in 1 hour. And those are really different situations in the classroom. So, so rate is a good option for that one. All right, so next is duration, and that is the length of time the behavior occurs. So for example, it might be the amount of time a student is off task, might be the length of time that a student is maybe having a tantrum in your classroom. The next one is latency, and that one is also time-based. It's the length of time between the time you give the prompt and when the student actually follows that prompt. For example, it might be the time between the teacher says, come to the reading table, and when the student actually arrives, right? There's a lot of things that can happen that can delay students in getting started and actually getting there. And so we might want to think about reducing the amount of time it takes for a student to arrive in the reading group. Exactly, Kathleen. The wandering, the sharpening of pencils, the visiting with friends, and so forth. Okay, and then the last one is about force, and that's the strength or intensity of the behavior. And for example, you might have a student moving from one place to another, and you ask them to walk, and they're stomping, right? And they're stomping pretty loudly, which could be disruptive in the classroom. All right, so those are our dimensions. All right, we're going to do a really quick practice, and I'm going to try not to double click and show you the answer before, but if you would open your chat and you have the graphic organizer or the infographic in front of you, and let's just do each one of these, and if you'd put your decision in the chat, that would be great. All right, so the first one is Susan worked math problems for 15 minutes. Duration, a lot of agreement. Okay, fantastic. All right, and you're right. Awesome. Jessica initiated use of her community communication device 6 times. All right, yep. We're looking at frequency. All right, let's do the next one. Once directed to return to his seat, it took 7 minutes for Charlie to leave the beanbag in the class reading area. It might take 7 minutes to get out of a beanbag, but okay. Yep, we're talking about latency for that one. And then Levi completed 4 math problems in 10 minutes. That one is rate. Okay, 100%. You guys rocked that. Thank you for playing along. All right, so now you want to select your measurement system that matches your dimension of interest. So one is we're going to look first at event-based systems, and these systems are based on counting the behavior. So the system is enticing because it's efficient to do in the classroom if you are the one teaching and collecting data. But we do want to caution you, because while it is sort of the most enticing because it feels like it might be the most manageable, it's not always the best choice for the behavior. So this system is appropriate for behaviors that are very discrete, meaning have a clear beginning and a clear end. sorry, I'm just looking at the chat, in that each occurrence of it is uniform in length. Okay, so on task behavior would not be a good behavior for this because you can be on task or off task because you can be off task for 1 minute or 10 minutes and it still gets a tally of 1, right? So we want to have very, very discrete uniform behavior. Some examples are on the slide: swearing, calling out of turn, and so forth. Okay, now a few tips as we get into this, and there are many more tips in the modules, but for this one we want to make sure that we have a time of day that is consistent for all of our observations, and that's really important because we know that behavior changes by context depending on the demands of the context in that context, and also during the day. We might be more alert in the morning and more tired in the afternoon, so our behavior is going to change according to that. And then we want to make sure that we have some feasible approach. Often it is the classroom teacher who's collecting these data, so we want to have a feasible approach for collecting them. You could use that Costco counters, right? As everyone comes in, you're clicking it to count the number of times you observe the behavior. You could use tallies. I've seen sticky notes, little pieces of paper, rubber bands in a pocket, rubber bands on your wrist, moving one wrist to the other. I used to use pennies in a pocket and move them from one to the other. So any way that you can quickly count the behaviors. And so, all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to practice, okay? So we're going to practice with telling, counting, clicking. You do it how you would like to. And we're going to watch this video. And before I start the video, to Elisa's earlier point, you need to know what behavior you're observing is. So we're going to practice with Jim's behavior. This is Jim Gaffigan, if you haven't met him. And his behavior is saying the word cake. So on the slide, you can see the full operational definition, but we are listening for the example cake. Okay, so if you will tally, and then when we're done, I'm going to ask you to put your responses in the chat, but please don't do it until we get to the next slide and I prompt you, because I want everyone to have a chance to do their tallies. Okay, all right, let's listen.
My favorite dessert is cake. Yeah. Cake's a true symbol of gluttony, though. If you eat a whole pizza, people are like, wow, you were hungry. But if you eat a whole cake, people are like, you got a problem. Addicted to cake. It's not like drinking. You never hear someone brag, yeah, last night I had 4 pieces of cake. Why are you telling us? Just want you to know I partied. Why don't you get away from me? Because everyone knows cake's bad for us. Sometimes we try and disguise the fact we're eating cake. It's breakfast, I can't have cake. I'll have a muffin. You know the difference between a cake and a muffin? Nothing. A muffin is a bald cupcake. And we know it. Have you seen the mini muffins? How much denial are we in when we're eating mini muffins? Oh, I'm just going to have like 1 or 12. So small they don't really count. They're like muffin vitamins. When I eat them, I feel like an astronaut. That's why I have them for breakfast. Can't have cake for breakfast. Unless it's a pancake. How'd that slide through? Young man, you're not having cake for breakfast. You're having fried cake with syrup for breakfast. Load up on that and try not to nap. Pancakes. Pancakes definitely make you lower your expectations. You're like, well, looks like I'm not showering today. I'm going to be digesting those carb cakes for hours. That was a bad idea. This guy talks a lot about cake. Cake's a powerful food. Cake can actually bring people together. It's Bill's birthday. I hate that guy. There's cake in the conference room. Well, I should say hello. See how he's doing. I mean, admit it, when you hear the song Happy Birthday, all you're thinking is, hey, I'm getting some free cake. During the song, you're just wondering what kind it is. Hope it's chocolate for me. All
right. All right, let's talk about Jim and his behavior. So if you will put in the chat, but don't quite hit enter yet, the number of times that you heard Jim say cake: 16, 18, 22. All right, all right. So it does look like we have a little bit of difference in our observations. So let's talk about why that is. So what were some of the challenges with frequency recording? You can go ahead and put them in the chat. So if you think back to our operational definition, the only example that we had in there was the word cake. And so we did not put in carb cake, cupcake, pancake, right, as options. So the differences we're seeing could be people that counted those versus people that did not. So it's the definition. It's an issue with our definition. What other kinds of more non-examples would have been helpful? All right. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So the clearer you can be so that you can ensure that two people listening or watching are recording that behavior in the same way, the better. Oh, didn't count plurals. Oh, that's very precise. All right. That's super precise. Fantastic. The other thing that can happen sometimes in the classroom are two things. It might be difficult to fully hear. Or so if you have behavior that is about things that the student might be saying, that is sometimes challenging. You can also get reactivity if you're a little too close or watching too closely. So really is something that you want to practice a little bit. I would encourage you to spend some time in the classroom if you're not the classroom teacher doing the observation, just to kind of minimize that reactivity piece. And the other thing is that, I don't know about you all, but when I'm in a classroom, I am collecting all the great ideas that are happening around the classroom. Look at that great bulletin board. I have to write that down. The teacher did this wonderful thing in the lesson, and I want to remember that. And then sometimes it can be missed. So that is, those are some things, excuse me. The other thing is, there were times where that word cake came at pretty rapid fire. And so I have the answer, I think. Well, I'm going to go with Elisa's answer of 18 times. I'm sure that is not how many tallies I have on my paper. So anyway, thank you for having that. So it looks like we're somewhere close and in the middle. And then the final question is really just, oh, I'm one click behind. My apologies. The final question is really just how these procedures can be improved. So what are some things that we could do? We said clarifying the operational definition, more examples, more non-examples for sure. What other things can you think of? Any things that you have used in observing that have, yeah, practice and giving feedback. Nice. Yeah, and for this particular behavior, it was very uniform in length. It had a clear beginning, a clear end. So this was a good approach. But if you find two observers not agreeing on a behavior, even relooking at the choice of the measurement system might be a good idea. Okay, so thank you for playing along with that. I appreciate it. Okay. So the next one is time-based recording, and time-based recording systems are most appropriate for behaviors that vary in length and they're less discrete. So for example, this might be off-task, non-compliance behaviors, tantruming behaviors, although I would say if you're targeting tantruming as a behavior, I would encourage you to think earlier in the cycle as Elise was talking about. We don't want students really getting to that peak behavior, so if we can catch them a little early on with lower levels behavior and get them back on track, that is a benefit for everyone involved in their learning. Okay, so a few tips with this. The same tip in terms of the stable time for day and context. That's always going to be, regardless of the measurement system that you use, important. And then for this one, you're going to use some sort of technologies for timing that allow you to capture and record the behavior. And I can show you on the next slide. There's a couple of those. This one is specifically for duration and latency, right? So where we want the time between the prompt and the behavior occurring, or the length of the behavior, this is what we're going to use. So the timing piece there, stopwatch on your phone, etc., is the tool that you need. Okay, now for interval recording, again, same for time and context, but this time we're going to choose that time period and then divide it into equal intervals. And the shorter the interval, may be useful if there's another observer. So if you're doing every 30 seconds, that seems reasonable if my role is to sit in your classroom and watch that happening. However, longer intervals are probably more feasible if the teacher is collecting the data. And there are trade-offs for both. You might get a more accurate representation of the behavior if you have shorter intervals, but you have to manage that with the feasibility of actually teaching while you're doing it. And then you want to select and practice with whatever your interval queuing system is. So we've in the past used motivators. They're little devices and you wear them on kind of your belt or in your pocket and you set them for an interval and they buzz to let you know and it automatically resets itself. They're fairly pricey. They used to be about $50. I don't even know, honestly, if they exist anymore, but there's a ton of less expensive digital tools that you can just download and use on your phone. So probably a much more practical application at this point. And then you're going to select and record the behavior occurrence. And there's really three kind of approaches for this. The first one is you can use whole interval. And that means you mark the behavior as occurring if it occurs during the entire interval of your observation. So whether it's 30 seconds or 2 minutes, happens the entire time, you mark that behavior as occurring. For partial interval, if it occurs anytime within the interval, you would mark it as occurring. And then for momentary time sampling, we're looking at the exact moment that your cue ends that interval. So when your phone buzzes or vibrates or whatever it is, that's when you look at the student, is the behavior occurring, yes or no? And if it is, then you mark it as yes. So 3 different approaches, trade-offs in terms of feasibility and accuracy, or preciseness, not accuracy, that you will need to decide. All right. We didn't cover these other 4 procedures that are part of this step, but please know that all of these are fully described with resources and materials in the module for step 3, including a checklist that gives you a guide for each of those procedures and how to set them up. And now David is going to take us to step 4.
Thank you, Wendy. We're now ready to design the functional assessment-based intervention. And we're going to look at different ways of doing that. But as we've seen with all of the steps, there are these step checklists to help you complete and make sure you're going through all of the important pieces for that, especially integrity check. Make sure you're following all of the processes that Elise was covering and telling us how systematic it is, with the great benefit there. So for step 4, you're going to select an intervention method, and we're going to show you 3 different methods as well as a combination of 2 of them and how to select them. And then regardless of which method you end up choosing, we'll show you why you choose one or the other. All methods are going to have ARE intervention components, and that stands for antecedents, reinforcement, and extinction components. And then you'll draft treatment integrity checklist to make sure whatever the intervention that you design is, that it gets implemented with integrity. And you'll assess that pre-intervention social validity, make sure people are on board with the goals, procedures, and outcomes. Those are the 4 components that we're going to look at today, but just like Wendy was saying with step 3, there's more in the modules if you go and explore those. And same with step 4, there's additional steps that you would do, including getting all the materials ready to go. So if your student's intervention includes communication cups, you got to go get those. And if it's a stoplight, as we'll see in an example, you got to make that and have it ready to go. And you want to introduce the FABI to the educators, families, students, everybody who's involved in supporting the student, and make any revisions and finalize it based on feedback as you introduce it and talk to people about implementing it. So as Elise was saying, one of the innovations from Umbright was that function matrix. The second one here is the function-based intervention decision model. And this is where you ask two questions as you decide which method to use to design the intervention. And there's a nice infographic in the module that you can follow along with and download and share with your colleagues, anybody who's working with FBAs and BIPs and hopefully functional assessment-based interventions, making it more systematic. The first question is, can the student perform the replacement behavior? Do they already have it in their repertoire? Can they do it? Have you seen them do it? Has it been observed? Maybe they don't do it regularly or with fluency or with as high a frequency as you would like, but if you know that they can do it, then you would say yes. The second question is, do antecedent conditions represent effective practices for this student? And by antecedent, we mean everything in the environment, everything that happens prior to that target behavior, that challenging behavior that we're hoping to see less of or eliminate and replace completely with the replacement behavior. So what's in the classroom setup and the procedures, the actions by the teachers and even peers, what are they doing? Does that represent best practices and effective practices to set the student up for success, to help hopefully guarantee and ensure that they're going to be engaging in the replacement behaviors, the desired behaviors, the pro-social, all the good behaviors that we want our students to have in their classroom so they can be successful with everything that they're there to learn. Regardless of which method, I was going to say also, so as you say yes or no, that isolates you to one column or one row. And as you say yes to one but no to the other, that locks you in. So if the student, yes, can perform the replacement behavior, then I'm only looking at the second column here under yes. And then when I answer question 2, maybe the antecedent conditions aren't best practices yet. That locks me into the top row. And so where do those match in this? That's method 2, where I'm going to adjust the environment. Whereas if I'd said, no, they don't know how to do the replacement behavior, and maybe the environment is set up. As teaching, my practices are great. I've got great procedures and routines and high rates of positive reinforcement and behavior-specific praise and all the low-intensity strategies to prevent challenging behaviors and encourage high opportunities. Everything's in place. So if I said, no, they're not doing the replacement behavior, whatever it is, but yes, my environment's great, that locks me into method 1 because I need to teach them that replacement behavior. Or maybe if I said no to both, then I got to do both of those things. I got to teach them replacement behavior and make adjustments to the environment, set them up for success and teach them how to best access my attention, or how is it appropriate to access the tangible or the activity that they're trying to get as determined from step 2 that Elise went over. Alternatively, method 3, if we said yes to both of those, they know how to do the replacement behavior. They're just not doing it often enough, frequently enough, or with fluency, and the antecedent conditions are set up pretty darn well, then we need to look at shifting the contingencies, such as higher rates of reinforcement for that replacement behavior, what we do want them to do more often. Because if we can increase the behavior-specific praise and the reinforcement, whatever they're finding reinforcing, because maybe some students thrive off of that attention and find the attention of behavior-specific praise to be reinforcing, and other students may not. So we need to shift the contingencies to show them this is how to get peer and adult attention appropriately, or how to get access to the activities and tangibles that you want, or the sensory experiences, or how to appropriately avoid the sensory experiences that you don't want. If it's too loud or you're bothered by your peers, how do you escape from that appropriately? And we're going to reinforce when they engage in that appropriate behavior to do so. Regardless of which method, 1, 2, or 3, or the combination of 1 and 2, all these FABI interventions are going to have ARE components. We're going to adjust the antecedents, whatever that means in the environment, to set it up for success, to make it more likely that the student's going to engage in the replacement behavior, to make it more likely that they won't need to engage in the challenging behavior, that target behavior that they were previously engaging in. For example, if their function was to access attention, what if we adjusted the environment to give them free access to attention? So just non-contingently, as they enter the door, I say hi, I comment on something in their appearance or ask about their pets at home. I'm engaging with them and giving them that free access to attention. And so suddenly they no longer need to act out and shout out or have tantrums to get my attention because they're getting a ton of it already. That could be one example of an antecedent adjustment, that non-contingent attention. Then for the reinforcement shifts, like I said before, just going to be sure that I'm placing my reinforcement for the replacement behavior. and not for the target behavior, the challenging behavior. So I'm going to watch for that replacement behavior, what I want them to do more often, and be sure to reinforce it. Maybe that's as simple as behavior-specific praise, noticing. Maybe it's just acknowledging. So if they see me giving them a look with a nod of approval or a wink, or maybe we've got a special signal like I tug on my earlobe or something, and they know that that's acknowledgement of that replacement behavior, maybe that's what's reinforcing for that student. Other students may need other things, may need the tickets that we have in our PBS and Ci3T systems paired with behavior-specific praise. I can increase that. And then for extinction, this can get a little tricky because some people think extinction is only ignoring the challenging behavior. And that can be a part of it, especially if the maintaining function was attention. But it's really about withholding what was previously reinforcing the target behavior. And instead of reinforcing that target challenging behavior, being sure that we're reinforcing the replacement behavior. So if it was for attention, let's say they're tantruming, they're acting out, they're shouting out, and it was for to get attention, then yes, I'm going to ignore that behavior, praise other students nearby for being on task, showing how to get my attention appropriately, and then watch for and wait and catch that student being on task and praise that so they see, oh, that's how I get the attention that I'm looking for. There's a great infographic in the module illustrating the ARE components. So this is for a student who is typically off task. That's their target behavior. And they do that. The function was determined to be attaining attention from the teacher and paraprofessionals, so the adults in the room, and to avoid completing work. So this infographic has a little illustration showing that if we adjust the environment, that we make those antecedent adjustments to include genuinely greeting the student prior to entering the classroom. So giving them that attention prior to even getting started in the classroom. Pairing them with a peer role model gets them peer attention. Maybe that'll help. Of course, having visible posters for what the expectations are makes it easy for me to refer to those as a teaching tool, as well as that subconscious learning and the visual reminders. The student might notice it and read it while they're glancing around the room off task, and remember to get back on task. Verbally stating the desired behavior, so pre-correcting, reminding them, redirecting, reteaching the expectations, and of course modeling all the expectations for class, and the student will receive that as part of it. Reinforcement shifts are going to include for this student lots of behavior-specific praise because they were trying to obtain attention with their off-task behavior. So I'm going to give it to them for reinforcing the on-task behavior. And when they complete large tasks, when they are on task working toward that completion, they're going to get my attention through the form of behavior-specific praise. And we're going to have a bigger celebration when they complete the task because that means they've been on task for a long enough time to complete the work. We're going to celebrate that bigger reinforcement. And they may even earn, I like this last one, a couple minutes to tell me a joke. Maybe it's for the class. They can stand up, tell the whole class a joke approved by me in advance because it's got to be appropriate for the class. But maybe they've got a knock-knock joke book, from the Scholastic Book Fair, and they want to read it in front of the class, get some attention that way. And that can be a huge reward. I taught high school for 8 years. Students love that, getting some time in front of the class to get a laugh out of everybody. And then for extinction procedures, the examples here are to give a nonverbal prompt at a schedule, because you don't want to give them too much attention to redirect them, but occasionally. So once every minute and a half, every 2 minutes, I can give them a nonverbal redirect or occasionally a very short verbal redirect. Like, remember, the expectation right now is to be on task or to do your math worksheet, whatever it may be. Something really short I can walk away from, so I'm not giving them a lot of attention, but I am reminding them of what the expectation is. And then praising other students nearby, showing them what it takes to get my attention appropriately, since that was the function of their behavior. So that infographic is in the module. You can access it there, and feel free to share that with your colleagues. Another example, this comes from Catherine Germer, I believe a master's student at the time, who was in a class with Kathleen, and this was published. She led this publication in Beyond Behavior back in 2011. And this is an illustration of a different David, not me, don't get confused. Second grade David, but this could have been me in second grade for sure. The target behavior was off task. And just like the illustration in the infographic, this referred to engaging in behaviors and verbal comments, anything unrelated to the instructional task. So like we looked at before with our operational definition, we got examples and non-examples. So leaving the assigned area, inappropriate comments to peers or the teacher, attending to anything other than what the academic current task is, doing unassigned tasks. So maybe it's academic, but it's not what's assigned right now. Using materials inappropriately, taking more than 30 seconds to get started, to get prepared. Because it's okay, it's going to take some time. I'm going to look around the room, I'm going to space out, but we usually put time limits on it because a good student is going to do that, sure, and then refocus. So we want to allow that, but within limits. So in this case, 30 seconds to get ready. Our replacement behavior, what we want the student to do is to be on task, so being engaged in behaviors and verbal comments related to those instructional tasks currently assigned. So those examples and non-examples match. Now they're in the assigned area, making on-topic comments to teachers and peers, working on what's assigned academically, using materials appropriately, and getting started, getting prepared within 30 seconds. This is from the published article, and you don't need to see the details of it, but just blur your eyes and visually you can see in this function matrix, you can see where the function is, because where are the areas that are most filled by those ABC data rows. So you can see the numbers where it's 1.1, that was the first observation, the first row from the ABC data. 3.3, oh, that was our third observation, the third row where the target behavior occurred. What's filled up? Positive reinforcement attention, negative reinforcement activity tangible. So we got a dual function here that we can hypothesize, so that when second grade David engages in off-task behavior, and it gives a few examples such as leaving the instructional area, inappropriate comments, engaging in unassigned tasks, he does it to access attention and or escape or avoid tasks. So in other words, when he's off task, he does it to get attention from his teacher and peers and doesn't have to complete assignments. So based on this student and knowing the student, we'd be able to answer these questions. Can second grade David perform the replacement behavior of being on task? Yes, we've seen him be on task. We know he can be on task. Are antecedent conditions representing effective practices? No. So that's going to lock us into method 2. So we're going to have all of our ARE components, but primarily we're going to focus on those antecedent adjustments to make the environment better suited to setting David up for success. And in this instance, taking from Wendy and our types of measurement and collecting baseline data, they selected duration. They had the ability to have a second person observing. Because if I'm the teacher, I can't do duration recording because all of my attention is focused on David with my stopwatch to start and stop it, which means I can't be teaching. But if I have a paraeducator or an aide or somebody who is can come in during math time, for example, because they have a conference period, just for the days of this intervention that we're trying to help out, they can do duration recording. Otherwise, I might use what Wendy was telling with that momentary time sampling, where only at the end of the interval do I need to look at David and quickly assess, is he at that instant on or off task? So if I'm the teacher, I might use momentary time sampling. In this illustration, we had a second person who was able to come and do duration recording. 20-minute sessions, starting and stopping the stopwatch and collecting this data, just total time, total duration. So for the example of what did they actually design for those ARE components, this is the intervention that they're doing. This is what you might have seen otherwise as a BIP, the behavior intervention plan. These are the ARE components of it. It included, for the antecedents, adjusting the seating. Where's he going to sit? Oh, he's got to be close to and facing the whiteboard, not anywhere else. And there's going to be a stoplight system. I'm going to show you that on a next slide. Self-monitoring system. The teacher's going to review a picture schedule. We know there's a lot of good evidence for visual activity schedules. And the teacher's going to check in with David at the beginning of independent tasks, make sure he heard and understood the directions before getting started. So in the classroom over here in the yellow, that's where he was, closer to the bookshelf and the manipulatives. There's some distractions there. So based on this new plan, we're going to have him seated closer to and facing the whiteboard. And then for that stoplight, just imagine a printout of a stoplight with a red light, yellow light, green light, and that's affixed to the side of the desk, taped on, hanging off the side with a clothespin attached. And so David can signal to the teacher, put it on green, I'm good, I understand the directions, I'm doing my work, I'm on task. Yellow, I'm asking a friend for help, or maybe it's I can get started, but I anticipate I'm going to need some help soon. And when it's on red, that's the big signal to the teacher, I need help, I'm stuck. And part of the agreement here is that if the teacher notices that it's on red, they're going to try and help out immediately because we want to reinforce the use of this system right away. And then there's another piece of the stoplight to signal like, I'm done. The whole task is complete. Reinforcement rates were adjusted as well because remember the ARE components are updated for no matter the method. So lots of behavior-specific praise, acknowledging the need for help when it's on red right away, checking the work, praising the work, You earned a short break. So, because remember, part of the hypothesis was to avoid the work. So good, you've done the work, so you get a break. And maybe that's accessing something fun for a little bit of time. And at the end, the teacher also checks the self-monitoring, because maybe there's some steps there to help him be on task, and find something to praise and write something good at the bottom. Maybe there's a home component there where the parent signs it and gets to see those positive comments as well. For extinction, the teacher is going to not give attention to that off-task behavior, except for that occasional very short verbal or gestural redirect, at most 1 per minute. And when David is off task, the teacher is going to praise other students nearby. And if you remember from the initial checklist for implementing step 4, we're going to develop a treatment integrity checklist. You might be asking, well, what goes on that? It looks like there's a lot there. Well, it's very simple. The ARE components go on that. What you just designed for the antecedent components, the reinforcement adjustments, and the extinction components, they just get listed here so that on Monday you can check, did they occur? On Tuesday you can check, did they occur? And so you can analyze by day what percentage of all the components were in place. Or you might look at each component individually. So each row at the end of a week, was this component in place all week? And so you can look at different ways to see, where are we falling short? What do we need to retrain? Maybe the paraeducators are responsible for certain parts, and you can provide some additional training, or yourself as the teacher, give a little booster or a reminder like, I keep forgetting to do this component. And then you can refresh on that. Pre-intervention social validity is important as well. What does the student think of it? Because maybe we need to make some adjustments. Maybe that stoplight on the side of his desk is mortifying and embarrassing. And so they're definitely not going to participate, and they're going to boycott the whole intervention and be even more disruptive. If we learn that by explaining the intervention and assessing social validity, we can make adjustments. Maybe there's a digital way we can do it where other students wouldn't be aware of what's happening. So we have forms here for all the adults involved at the school. There's a family version for the family social validity. What do they think of the plan? And a student version. All those forms are available in the module. On that professional learning tab of Ci3T.org, if you scroll down to the blue and find the final Empower session for this year, open that up and you'll find, I believe it's handout 3 for practicing with ARE components. So we're going to head into our breakout rooms and practice designing some ARE components now.
And the last step is an important one and worth mentioning. So hang tight on this. You know how like oftentimes we collect baseline data and we start an intervention and we think, thank God it's working. We can't do that. Because if we really want to be sure that it is the intervention and not something else that's creating that behavior change, we have to actually formally test that. So those modules that Elise showed you at the very beginning, you're going to want to invest a little bit of time to think about what is a reasonable test. So if it is something that was already in the kids' repertoire, that we just had to motivate them to do more of it, meaning they were capable of performing the replacement behavior, and we just needed to make those antecedent adjustments to enhance that environment for that student. And hear me, oftentimes classrooms are working really well for the majority of the kids, but it's just a couple kids, and that's why that second question says for this student. So when we make those types of adjustments, we can do a quick withdrawal, but sometimes if they're learning new behaviors, we need a design that allows us to do like a shift over time, either with different behaviors or in different contexts. But we have to have some real honest to God test to know, did that intervention with the ARE components, did that work? So in other words, not only do we need to collect information on fidelity to know, did I do the antecedent adjustments regularly on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Did I do the reinforcement shifts? Did I do the extinction component? I want to know the pieces that had to be in play. And remember, you oftentimes don't have to be perfect. You don't need 100% fidelity to get the return on your investment. But we need to have something that allows us to collect information to know when this intervention was in place, was behavior different than when it was not in place. So here in this one, and if you look at the time of this, it's 4/27 through 5/28. 5/28 was the last day of that school year. And you may think, why in the world would somebody want to do a functional assessment-based intervention the last month of school? That teacher was pregnant and she's like, I cannot live like this between now and the end of the year. So it was fast, it was practical, they found the function. Those first 2 data points that you see during baseline, engagement looks pretty high. I think about that like dating. And then you get into marriage and that's what it like settles into. So when we look at that, I look at those stability like a downward countertherapeutic trend. I put it back in. And the interesting note, you see that one dip during the day during intervention? That is when they had a substitute teacher and fidelity was really low. It didn't happen on that day, which is a nice other little test. And so then it was withdrawn and put back in. And those mean levels show very clearly that when that intervention was in place, we saw a functional relation between the initial introduction of that intervention and changes in student behavior. So that graph is showing one demonstration, two replications. So step 5 is testing it. And I know there's that feeling of, oh, for the love of God, the kid's behavior is finally better. Why do I need to test it out to make sure it's that? That is why we have to have confidence. And God ever needed to go to something more intensive, or if your child changed context, we want them to have that information. So we hope that you enjoyed this session today, and we hope it felt rigorous for those of you that are in classrooms, knowing you need something that packs a punch to really respectfully manage challenging behavior. We hope you'll continue your learning with us using these modules, and that you'll leave with some action items about how you might continue your learning. And we would love to explore more of this with you. We also want to invite you tonight to know that next year's sessions are all available for you. So if you wanted to, you could pop on that professional learning session, sign up for next year's classes, or feel free to drop into a coaching call for today. But just know, more than anything, we appreciate the gift of your commitment. Your time is the greatest gift that you can give somebody else. So thank you for being here to learn with us. Thanks to everybody that prepped for tonight. Thank you for being here. We hope you'll consider coming and joining us over the summertime if you want to pop in for any coaching sessions or additional learning. And we really hope to see you at next year's Empowers. A special thanks to Elise and Stacy and David and Wendy and all the fabulous coaches. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe and enjoy the end of this year. Being a teacher, best job ever. So enjoy it. I'll talk to you all soon. Be safe.